working for the YWCA of the Hartford Region's Sexual Assault Crisis Service Program for 5 years, program director. She is currently working as the project director, Human Anti-Trafficking, always a moderator. And I take pleasure at this time in introducing the moderator. My apologies. Reverend Tracy Johnson Russell. Reverend Tracy Johnson Russell is a well of being used for this conversation. We introduce to you the moderator, who is also the founder of the Rivers Women's Initiative. Over the years, Melinda Johnson has worked in a diversity of arenas to a diverse spectrum of people, including youth, young adults, and the incarcerated. She is the wife of Elder Ashley Johnson, pastor of Urban Hope Refuge, located at 136 Westland Street, Hartford, Connecticut. Lady Johnson serves in her local church as the Director of Christian Education. In 2010, she graduated from Tabernacle Bible College and Seminary.
Excuse the glitches. Y'all must know this work isn't easy. I'd like to welcome you now to our community discussion and forum and to thank each individual that has participated in this project. If we can give a round of applause once again. It surely has been an incredible journey in creating this mini documentary, and we quickly realized after formulating this that the work did not end there. And we decided that we needed to engage our community in a discussion about an issue that oftentimes many people try to hush. And with that being said, we are now going to engage in our community forum. So I want you to shake off any form of uncomfort that you are feeling right now, because what we have come here to do is to be solution finders. And the solution lies in your voice. We need to hear your questions. As a community, we need to hear your concerns. We need to hear your input, because together we make our community better. All right? You guys with me? Yes. Let's get on into this. Ladies, are you ready? Okay. So I will be asking questions, and as I'm asking questions and they're answering, if you have a question, Mr. A.J. Johnson will be in the crowd with a microphone. Sure. Mr. A.J. Johnson and Mr. Ronald Campbell will be in the crowd with microphones, and they will be coming to you so you can pronounce your questions. All righty? Here we go. So after seeing a documentary like this, I know oftentimes what's on people's mind is, why is violence against women such a hushed issue? If it's so popular, if the statistics tell us that this is going on all the time, why do we feel that violence against women is such a hushed issue? And I'll invite Ashley Biggs to start us off in this conversation.
Sure. So in my arena, I work mostly with people who've already made their way through the court process, and that is a very small portion of the people who actually get victimized on an annual basis. So I'll be happy to answer that question. A lot of people don't even get to the point where they are ready to tell anyone, let alone report, because of the victim being on trial, way more often than the offender being on trial in the way that we have everything set up today. But before that even, a lot of times families are not even believing of the victim. So if you're at a point where you've been traumatized and victimized, and you don't have a social support system in place to help you deal with that and to even acknowledge that that has happened, it's going to be very, very hard for you to come out and say that something's happened to you when the likelihood of people around you believing you is very slim.
Thank Thank you for that. And you're bringing up a lot of good points. And one of the things that you brought up is oftentimes when we look at abuse or we look at situations that are going in our life, we sometimes don't comprehend what exactly is going on. So let's define that, ladies. What do we define as a violent act?
I think we're talking about, well, particularly in talking about sexual violence, I would define it as, well, so we're talking about particularly like a sexual assault, I would say any sort of non-consensual sexual contact, right? And we understand that consent isn't just, oh, whether you say yes or no, right? So, like, can you consent, right? So if you can't consent, like a child can't consent to being in a relationship with an adult, right? So in that manner, like, that would be a sexual assault. What are the power relations? Like, did you say yes? Did you say no? Did you not say anything? Just because you didn't say no doesn't mean that it was consensual. And so I think in terms of like sexual assault and the actual like sort of sexual contact, that's how I define sort of sexual assault. But we also, when we're thinking about sexual violence as a whole, it's beyond just the actual act. When we're thinking about what are the attitudes, what are the behaviors that go on in our society that allow sexual violence and sexual assaults to happen. The victim blaming, the sexual hypersexualization of like particularly women and children on TV, right? That's all part of sexual violence as well.
Bring up awesome good points. So when we oftentimes look at violent acts, and it was also mentioned in the mini documentary, one thing that's sometimes brought up is the grooming process. And oftentimes we don't know what that means, but when we're talking about the grooming process, we're really talking about the bending of someone's will. So like you said, it's not a yes, it's not a no, maybe it's silence because of this grooming process. Yvette, can you speak more to how the grooming process plays a role sometimes in human trafficking, especially with young girls?
Okay. It's an essential piece of the puzzle. So when it comes to human trafficking, which is defined, so you talk about sexual victimization, it's usually the exchange of a sex act for anything of value is how we would define that, especially on the sex trafficking side of the equation, right? So whether it's financial, a lot of people usually assume it's money, but sometimes it's just a place to live or food or clothing, whatever the basic need is for that individual. So a lot of times with human trafficking, what you see as far as the grooming process is a relationship building process. So you'll have individuals who will seek out young girls or boys and they will try to befriend them. So one of the examples I've always given is on social media, I'll like your page, I'll become your friend, I'll learn as much as I can about who you are as a person, and I'll use that information to sort of get you to feel comfortable with me. And once you feel like I'm your friend, you know, I'm your support system, or I'm gonna be your boyfriend or girlfriend, or I'm a mother figure or father figure to you, you trust me. And if you trust me, then you're going to allow me to come into your space, or you're gonna come into my space. And once that trust is developed and you feel like you care for this person is taking care of you. Because the other thing in the grooming process is they buy things. So it's like, oh, you don't have any new pair of sneakers? I'll get that for you. Your family can't afford it? That's fine. You want to go out to the movies or you want to go out to eat, you want to do social things? So a lot of the grooming process feels really good, right? It's like the honeymoon stage when you talk about domestic violence. Everything feels good. This person feels like a safe person. And then it transitions into the violence. So it's like, I've given you this, I've offered you this, so now you owe me something in return. And what you're gonna do now for me is you're gonna sell yourself for sex because then I can benefit financially from that. Or they use, if you love me, you will do this for me because this is how I make my living, this is how I survive. So it's really deceptive and it's very manipulative and it feels good at first, especially for children who are looking for attention and affection and a connection with another adult person, but it quickly transitions into a very violent relationship.
Yes.
In family dynamic situations, the grooming process is very much largely the reason why a lot of people end up not reporting as well. Going back to your initial question, why people don't report, a lot of people in familial assaults are groomed ahead of time. So Uncle so-and-so looks real, you know, they have a bond with them. I don't want to get this person in trouble. If I tell, this is going to happen to the person, or sometimes they even resort to threatening. So grooming definitely plays a big part in why a lot of people do not tell about, you know, what's going on within their households.
Can I add something quickly related to the first question? Because there's some keywords that came up for me when I thought about the question about why is it such a hush issue. And the terminology that just kept coming up for me is shame, fear, guilt, and self-blame, right? So there's this concept that I had something to do with. So even when we see human trafficking victims, it's obvious someone, especially when there is a explored or involved, how could you blame yourself, right? How can you say that this is your fault? A lot of that sort of blaming, which gets internalized because there's so much victim blaming in our society in general, or the guilt that, oh, if I say something, I'm going to get this person in trouble, especially when it comes to family members, or if it's someone you love, how could I do that to that person? They're going to get prosecuted, they're going to, be arrested, etc. So can I do that? And then there's a fear piece, which is maybe I'm being threatened. Like if you say something or you tell your family's going to die, you're going to die, something bad is going to happen to you. And then the natural shame. Who naturally is just going to walk outside of what is their comfort zone and their understanding of self and go and disclose something to someone else about what someone has done to them, which has been made for them to feel like a thing that they caused, or they were because you did this, this is why this is happening to you. So I think it's important for people to understand that there's so many dynamics that prevent folks from coming forward, and it's not a simple process.
Right. Let's check in with our audience. Are there any questions at this time? Then yes, Reverend Tracy.
So I also wanted to go back to the idea of why this is hushed, and coming from the community of faith. We are told, we have Bible stories that we can point to about how women are supposed to behave and things like that. Paul is really wonderful at telling us how we women should behave. And so there is that whole idea of shame and guilt that perhaps you're not being the perfect wife, as Scripture has delineated it, because, you're being abused or whatever. And this is, maybe you're supposed to be taking it because Scripture says it. And so I feel oftentimes Scripture can be used as a form of also kind of grooming as well.
You all are really touching on some interesting topics, because one of the things that I'm hearing, especially with this grooming process, is the idea of, in this hush process, is the idea of what happens in the house stays in the house. And I see all the nods in the crowd, and that means we all either come from a community that is a minority-based community where we've heard that, or we serve in a community that's a minority-based community, we've heard that. And there are both positives and negatives when that happens, when that conversation is had in the house, and that's sometimes part of that grooming process. So when we talk about that phrase, what happens in the house stays in the house, what are both the positives and the consequences of a phrase like that on both the women, the children, and the men, that whole family dynamic?
I think when I hear about thinking about what happens in the house stays in the house, I always sort of think about historically, right? Where does this come from? And I think particularly for communities of color is that we've been historically stigmatized and been portrayed as being less than. Right? And so the whole idea is you're not going to go out and air your quote unquote dirty laundry for everybody to see, and then they're going to say, well, see, this is what I told you, look at these people, right? And I hear this, right? We can all think back to conversations we've heard where people have said something really oppressive, and well, that's just how they are, right? And so I think that particularly, speaking from my group, right? Speaking from Black community, we we're going to handle it, right? Community policing is, I think, amazing, right? I think of a positive piece, keeping things within the home and the community, if we're actually handling them, can be amazing, right? If we are actually addressing the issue of sexual violence in our families, and we're saying we're going to keep it in, but we're going to handle it, we're going to make sure this doesn't happen again, I think that can be a really positive piece. But what that often ends up happening is what happens in the family stays in the family means just be quiet. Don't say anything else again, I don't want to hear about it. And the abuse continues to happen, but now the person feels well, I did what I was supposed to do. I said something, and nobody helped me. And so now I have to keep quiet. And so I think if we are truly practicing it and truly thinking about real community accountability, it can be amazing. But that's not often what's happening.
I think one of the other things that I think about with this particular issue is, one, I feel everybody in the family unit gets hurt by that statement, right? Because it's a very powerful statement, and it's a clear statement of, you don't want other people in our business. There's the issue of, will DCF come in and take you from us? Is the police going to come in? If it's against your father, who's going to provide for us if the mother isn't working? The dynamics become so endless, right? Of the risk and the sort of dismantling that can happen of a family system when disclosures happen. But the hard part is you have children who just continue to get victimized. And one of the things when I used to train for sexual assault, one of the statistics that was very impactful for me is children don't tell because they're not asked. Right? So because there's no conversation, you have parents who may know that their child is being victimized, but they don't ask the question because they don't want to open that floodgate, right? Or if the child discloses, and the first person the child disclosed to is essential in the process towards healing. If they don't believe you, or they question you, or they're like, no, this guy or this woman could never do that. They're the pillar of society. They're a great human being. They have such a great reputation. No one's going to believe you anyway, so just keep your mouth shut, right? So when you're confronted with that kind of message and you receive that sort of it's your fault undertone in the conversation, then you're not going to move forward. And I think what hurts the most is that people don't realize how much it destroys a family ultimately. It's not preserving the family, it's ultimately going to destroy it, because that level of pain that individual or individuals are experiencing will erode and eat away at the fabric of that family.
Reverend Tracy, at St. Monica's, you serve a good portion of our community, especially in the Main Street and North End of Hartford area. And with that being said, in serving a community, we realize that a lot of issues are just intersectional and they compound one on top of the other on top of the other. But sometimes it's like pulling teeth to get people to come and want the services. What do you find are some of the barriers of people encounter that keep them from wanting to find the services to assist them, and some of the issues that you guys spoke about?
Well, I think the biggest is shame and fear. We do live in a society where we're told to be the best and the brightest and all that kind of thing, and we know that those of us in the community who are minorities have an even higher standard that we must reach for, and so for some folks to admit that they need help or that they're in pain is also kind of admitting that there is a weakness, that we're human beings, right? And particularly if folks feel as though they're not loved and cared for and all those kind of things in their own family, where else can they find that? Well, we hope and pray that folks feel that they can find that in church. And the reality is sometimes you can and sometimes you can't, right? And so I think for me as a faith leader in this community, it's been very, very important in my ministry for me to remember kind of like the baptismal covenant of the Episcopal Church, which is to seek and serve God and all people, and to really be on the side of justice, and to show folks love, God's love. And I think for my ministry, that's been very, very important, because there are so many people who feel unloved in this world. And so I really do feel that that's one of the callings that we as a church, big church, everyone, regardless of denomination, that's one of our responsibilities, is to love.
So all four of you come from some vocation in which you serve the community. And in the human services field, I've been in the human services field for approximately 8 years now, and I've recognized that the human services field has pretty much, in great proportion, been tailored for minority communities. On a yes and no side. On the side of we're tailoring for minority communities because most of the time they're most disenfranchised, and on the side of not so much so because oftentimes the people there don't speak our language, don't understand our culture, don't understand where we're coming from. So what essential cultural concepts must we look at when we're serving minority women? What essential concepts do we have to consider when we're serving minority women?
I think it's important to allow people to show up as who they are, right? And so it's an answer to that question, because I've been thinking about that, right? I get asked to train a lot about on cultural competency and how do we serve the Black community, how do you serve the LGBTQ community, right? And what I find for me the biggest barrier is if I go to a service provider and I get met with a microaggression, right? So they're not doing something that's overtly discriminatory, but they're doing something that conveys to me that they see me as less than. right? An example is like I took my dog to the vet, and my dog's really fluffy and has lots of hair. And the vet asked me if I was gonna cornrow or dread my dog's hair, right? And so, like, he said nothing, like, he wasn't like, you can't be served here or anything like that. But I heard it, I'm like, I don't wanna see you again, right? And so I'm walking into that, and I'm like, I know how you see me, right? Like, I walked in, natural hair, you saw one aspect of me, you weren't allowing me to show up as my full self. And so, I think what a lot of social services, like, folks of color, because of, like, sort of the system, like, what we're disproportionately like low income, so we're seeking out a lot of social services more often, just because oppression, right? Like it's a long conversation, but in short, oppression. And so while we're accessing the services, organizations aren't necessarily set up to see us, right? So there's still a lot of organizations are based on understanding sort of privilege, and who are they centering as like the ideal is people from their own background, and that's not necessarily us. And this is ingrained in every fabric of different services. So what can organizations do to like better serve like women of color is that they can see us, right? Is that they can allow us to show up as fully us and just meet us where we're at and not have to like say ridiculous things about, you know, hair and different things like that.
I think one of the things that's important is understanding the role that woman plays in her family unit, whether it's her immediate family or extended family, and her role in the community, right? And sort of understanding the value that comes with that position and having a conversation, because the reality is to disclose could mean, as I said before, dismantling an entire family unit, right? Sending someone that you love to prison, or having your child be removed from your home because the department feels like you've been negligent, right, in caring for and protecting that child. So I think it's important to understand how family and culture and community factors into someone's decision to come forward. And so when you have a greater understanding, you can tread lightly, right? So the blaming that can tend to happen, the judgment that can tend to happen can start to disseminate, because then you start to understand, you know, this is another woman sitting across from me, that could be me, this could be my reality, right? Our humanness, our gender unites us and connects us, right? And so abuse is bad no matter what the color of your skin is. So let me understand you. I think of more people, because cultural competency is like one of the worst things to say you can train, because you really can't train it. Because I can say all black people look like this and all Latino people look like that, and that's not true, because we know within even our own community, we're just all different based on the life experiences we have. So I think the one thing I would say to any person who is going to interact with any victim, ask them their story. Sit and listen. Just let them speak and share with you what their reality is, with a no judgment zone. Because if you do anything other than that, you're going to alienate that person.
Oftentimes, I'm astounded at the way that, just walking up and down the streets of Hartford, I'm astounded at the way that our minority men treat our minority women. And I'm sticking on this issue just for a moment, and we're going to shift gears. But I'm oftentimes struck by the catcalls, by how offended men become if you don't appeal to the fact that they commented on your body. I'm appalled by these things, and at the same time, I'm not shocked. Because when we look around, we often see that minority women in particular, based on the voluptuousness of our body types, we are portrayed in media to be sex symbols. So let's take a moment to talk about how does the media's hypersexual portrayal of women of color contribute to the high rate of abuse amongst women of color? Anybody want to take it? Anybody out there want to take it? Jump on in.
I think when we're thinking about sort of like hypersexualization, I think the problem is that there's no agency in it, right? And so we're portrayed as like hypersexual, but with no agency. So no ability to say yes, no, or whatever, right? And so we're like, women of color in particular are always portrayed as like always ready, willing to engage in any sort of sexual encounter, right? And so the idea that we would say no is like, what? Or what are you talking about, right? Then I think about like when you're talking about like street harassment, like it's so hard for people to even understand that that's a problem, right? Like it's often portrayed like you should be grateful, I'm giving you a compliment, right? Like I'm just telling you to smile, like what's wrong with that, right? And not recognizing like I don't want to talk to you, right? I don't need to engage with you. And I I think that hypersexualization is just the idea that we're always like ready, willing to engage in whatever sort of sexual encounter that is offered to us, and we should be grateful for it, right? Because it's a hypersexualization, but it's also the devaluation of us, right? And so we're hypersexualized, but you should be grateful that unlike anybody wants you. And so like that combined really adds to like contributes to violence against particularly women of color.
The reality is when you objectify any human being, you dehumanize that.
Exactly.
And the only way you can victimize is to not see that person as a human being, right? So it makes sense that that's the imagery and that objectification exists because then it justifies the abuse, right? Then I can say, okay, well, it's because she was this or because she was wearing this or because she looked like this, she wanted it. This is what naturally comes from that kind of, imagery. So it doesn't matter if it's sexual abuse or other, once you have turned someone into not being a human being to you, but to be a body part or to be a vessel, then it's easy for you to say, then you don't have the right to say no, or you don't have the right to resist because you're an object to me. You're not a human being to me. You don't have feelings and emotions. There's nothing I have to consider other than the fact that you have something I want. And so that's the danger of how our society perpetuates women and young girls. It's not just women and young girls, is that it turned them into objects that then perpetrators feel like, well, it's okay because that's what you are.
We have a question from Angela. Angela?
Actually, it was sort of a statement when we start to look at the way men are treating young women. And now we see a lot of women actually buying into this because they're going out and adding things to their bodies, getting injections in their behinds and adding things to enhance it. So it attracts the male. It's as if they're saying, well, God, I'm not happy with what you gave me, so I'm going to do this because I can't get what I want. I'm trying to attract some attention too. It is two-sided, and I do hear the cry in the voice of, the abuse, sexual abuse. I once was a victim, and my daughter ended up being part of that cycle. I didn't even know I ended up here today. I came to get a movie, and somebody mentioned it, and I just said, okay, Lord, I'm going this way and see what's going on.
Amen.
But nonetheless, women, as women of the cloth and women just in the society, we have to begin to come back and teach these young ladies that they are valuable. They don't have any value. They don't know that they are rubies or high above that. And we let social media, we let television, everything is defining us, and we're not defining ourselves. And nobody is teaching these women or young women that are growing up that they are someone and that they can reject